Okay, we're back with Jeff Slaughter. And last time we talked about his spiritual background, how he got saved. I want to talk with you this time, Jeff, about how did you feel that what happened when you felt like God was calling you into ministry? Let's start with when you got out of college. You had already traveled with that group. You met Kathy in '85. And when did you start feeling that God was calling you into ministry of some sort?
Well, I started feeling like that in college. I basically majored in public relations and business um, because back then I could have majored in music to become a music pastor, because that's what they were called back then.
Okay.
But back then a music pastor basically stood up in front of a congregation and waved his arms at people.
Yeah.
And that was not attractive to me. I didn't want to wave my arms at people. I don't know what it was about that, but it just didn't speak to me.
Something about that bingo arm, huh?
Yeah, I had always been behind the piano. That's where I was comfortable.
Yeah.
And singing, and at that point, that the model that we know today, with bands and contemporary worship, was not yet there. It was basically a man leading, stand up, waving at people, encouraging them to sing, speaking between psalms, having an organ on one side, a piano on the other, a choir behind him. And all that was fine, and that's what I was used to. But for some reason, it didn't make me want to spend 5 years in a room practicing piano, to get a degree in music and come out and find a church and be that style of music minister.
Okay.
So I had been a writer. I'd been an editor of my high school newspaper for 3 years.
Oh, wow.
I always loved writing. I was also editor of my college newspaper for several years.
Wow.
And public relations seemed like a natural progression. But I was stuck a little bit because my college did not offer even a communications degree. But we got around that by the academic dean offering a friend and I to basically choose a different kind of degree, which is called a Bachelor of Applied Science.
Okay.
And we were able to get 30 hours of communications at a nearby university in Shreveport, LSU, and then 30 hours of business at East Texas Baptist College. And together, those basically created a double major, and we were able to get this kind of degree.
Okay.
So I got out, and my first job was a hospital. My first real job, as my wife would say, would be working at a hospital in PR. I did that for a couple of years, and then the CEO left and took a job in Jackson, Mississippi, at a freestanding rehabilitation hospital. And a few months after he left, he called me and said, "Jeff, I really need somebody over here. I need a writer," is what he said.
Okay.
Would you consider coming? And so I said, yeah, I would. So we loaded up in the car with the baby and drove over there one day to Jackson, and we drove up to the hospital. I jumped in the elevators and just got out on each floor just to look and see what was there.
Oh, wow.
Because I didn't know if it was okay if I was walking around the hospital.
Wow.
But it was a very nice hospital. I was very impressed with it. And then we went to the zoo and kind of had a fun day, and then went back home. And we began the process of talking to.
You ride the train at the zoo?
I don't know if we did or not. That was a long time ago.
You remember the train?
I do remember the train.
The cheesy little train they had?
I do remember the train.
What year was it that you moved to Jackson? 89?
It was 1989, yeah.
And that's when you guys, when we met at Cornerstone Church, which is still going, and we're missionaries out of that church. You guys are missionaries out of that church. Right. And you were working in that medical facility there. How did you, what brought you to feeling like you were being called to missions, missions, music missions, foreign music missions?
I know. It doesn't get much crazier. I had always had this feeling in my heart that I was called to something big, something large, something different. I didn't know what that was. When I was in college, I thought it was going to be Nashville, and I was going to be Mr. Amy Grant. Not necessarily the husband of Amy Grant, but just I wanted to go to Nashville and be a contemporary Christian music person.
Okay.
For some reason, I never went. I never left. I didn't have the courage. It didn't feel right. I can't tell you why I never did it, but I never did.
Hmm.
But what I think that was, I was just taking the calling and applying what I knew at that point, what it could look like.
Mm-hmm.
But in truth, that wasn't where I was supposed to go. And so I just kind of waited and did other things. And when we got to Jackson, we found Cornerstone, and within just a few weeks, the worship pastor, Jim Joyce, asked to have lunch with me. And I don't know how he found out I could do what I did, but he did, and invited me to join.
Somebody found you again.
Someone found me again. Yes.
That's cool. All right. Came looking for you. And
Yeah.
Jim Joyce, let's say this. Jim
Yeah.
Joyce was a great brother, and he's gone home to be with the Lord now. And his wonderful wife, Faith, and their kiddos, what a blessing they were to just untold numbers. Jimmy was such a gifted musician.
He was, and even more than that, for those of us that were part of that team, is he was a pastor and a disciple.
All right.
You know, so many of us had grown up with the focus on music. It was music first.
Okay.
And his whole thing was, no, it's Jesus first. It's our relationship with him first. So we would have sessions where we would come in and think we were going to be practicing, and he said, no, we're going to spend time in prayer first, you know, and we'd be laying around on the floor for an hour or whatever, or in different parts of the auditorium, spending time with the Lord before we would prepare. And he didn't call it practice. He called it preparation. You were never allowed to call it practice. It was preparation.
Okay.
The other thing that he did for a season, which was really interesting to me, was that he required us to clean the church before we did preparation time. So we would come in at 6:30 or whatever on a weekday night, and everyone would give their assignments and spend about an hour cleaning the church.
Wow.
That was at a time when Cornerstone did not have someone to clean the church. And it was a way of Jim introducing servanthood to us.
Okay.
You know, if you're not willing to clean toilets, then you don't need to be standing in front of the congregation leading worship. You know, you're not too good to clean toilets, basically. And it was just a way of helping us, of bringing some humility into our lives. And I think everyone, I remember it's all just responding to it. I mean, I'm sure there was some bad attitudes. I'm sure I did at times, you know, because we felt like that was a waste of our time. But in the end, I think it spoke a lot to Jim's just a practical way of just discipling us and teaching us that this is what we're here for. It's not just about being up front leading worship. It's about serving in the unseen parts of the church.
How would you tell prospective worship leaders? How would you tell them that ministry and service connect and work with one another?
Well, I think that's exactly what it does. It is about serving. That's what we're there for. It's not about we used to call it performance. It's not about performance. It's not about just being up front and being seen. It's not about our gift, you know. And so many times we make it about our gift and what we can do, and you know, how we look, and you know, how we sound, and all those kinds of things. And those things are important on one level, but the most important thing is that we're there to serve. And sometimes it looks different. Sometimes it can look like cleaning the toilets. Sometimes it can look like doing songs we get tired of, and doing them with, you know, with gusto and, you know, excitement, even though we're sick of the song.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can look like, you know, praying for people and taking food to people, and, you know, those kinds of things that, you know, we're worshiping with acts of service, not just with our voices and with our instruments.
How do you feel that experience impacted and influenced, rather, your thinking about what it means to be a true music minister?
For me, those years at Cornerstone were pivotal in training us for the next step of our lives. Jim taught us so much more than music, so much more than worship, because as much as he loved music and loved worship, I mean, it was such a much deeper foundation that he was laying for us. And, we had a lot of precious times, a lot of great relationships came from those years.
Mm-hmm.
And, that I've carried with me since then. And I've tried to share those things with others, when we had opportunity to, because that, if you don't have the foundation,
Mm-hmm.
then if you don't have that kind of foundation, then at some point the music's going to get, it's just worship. It's just going to be about music, and it's so much more than that. But the foundation Jim gave us allowed us to build on that, and basically have a much stronger foundation and putting roots down for ministry that could last decades, not just a few years.
Okay, I want to talk about what you're doing now and where all that led in future talks. But what do you tell music people who aspire to be on the worship team and worship ministers? What do you tell them now is the most important aspect of being a worship leader?
Well, the most important aspect is to maintain your relationship with the Lord.
Okay.
And, to be in His Word, to be in communion with Him through prayer, and then to, develop relationships with your team and with your pastor. I think you have to have a strong relationship with your pastor because he's leading the church. Okay. And you have to trust him, and you have to be willing to lay your own desires down to follow his vision, And so, to me, those are all aspects of being a servant worship leader.
What do you say to those who would get into worship leading for the attention that it can bring, so they can be in front of people?
Right. Well, that is short-lived. It doesn't satisfy. It doesn't bring you the feels that you think it's going to. Very very often that involves envy and jealousy. If someone gets the solo that you wanted, then your heart's out of whack. It's a wrong motive. Many of us have to deal with those things. We have to deal with those hard issues because it's often in the makeup of a musician, of an artist, to want to be seen and want to be recognized and want to be lauded. So we have to fight those feelings, and we have to recognize they're there, but at the same time, bring them under the submission of Jesus.
Could it be said that it's the natural inclination of the flesh to be seen and lauded? Yeah,
it is.
Yeah. So it's almost as if worship leaders are really just people who have the same problems, issues, and temptations that everybody else has, huh?
It's almost.
Jeff, listen, I appreciate you talking about that. That's really cool. We've had some really cool history together, and some great days together with Cornerstone and Nick Irons, who's there now. What a brother he is, and we're going to have interviews with him at another time. But I appreciate you sharing with us some of that intervening time of steps toward ministry. And next time, let's talk about how you got into Europe.
Okay.
Does that work?
Yes, that works.
Thanks, man.